Hello, this is Mike Watson. I'm standing in front of one of the more historic houses in Columbia, Adair County, Kentucky, the John Field House. Built in 1812, this is one of 3 houses of this style and built in about the same year. John Field is the subject of my little talk today. And I do not want to give too much information because I want you to dig for more yourself. But suffice it to say, John Field was nearly a founding father of Columbia. For as a teenager, he came into Adair County with his stepfather, went into business on his own, and eventually became a wealthy man before he lost it all to bad business decisions. We can tell you more as we go along. We have moved to a new location. Since it isn't feasible to visit John Field's cemetery and grave marker, we're visiting his son, Dr. Samuel Brents Field, in the Columbia City Cemetery. A little bit more about John Field before we mention his family again. John Field was born in Bedford County, Virginia in September 1777. He had one brother, Thomas. Their mother, Sarah White Field, and their father, John Field, probably hoped to raise a large family, as was the custom of the time. But before John was a full year old, his father died. It has been suggested that he died as the result of service in the American Revolutionary Army. We don't know that for a fact, and someday we hope to find. But there are so many John Field and Fields who served in that war, it has been nearly impossible to determine which was which. Sarah White Field, with 2 little children, married again very quickly. By 1780, she married William Hurt, and along with her brothers, her father, and others from Bedford County, they moved slowly but surely to Kentucky. By 1792, William Hurt and his family, now growing with new babies, were living in Bourbon County. But he looked farther west. He came to what is now Adair County, then Greene County, found a tract of land, and along with his white brothers-in-law and father-in-law, came to settle here. William Hurt, his 16-year-old stepson, John Field, and 2 enslaved people, Thomas and Rebecca, came to what is now the Tabor community and settled on a tract of land in the fall of 1792. The following year, he would bring his whole family. But it's important to note that 16-year-old John Field and the 2 slaves were left here over the winter. A cabin was built, corral for a couple of horses, and any preparations that were needed for the winter were made. William Hurt headed back to Bourbon County. Now today, by highway, Bourbon County is a few hours away. Then it was several weeks to return by cart into this neighborhood. It's important to note that Indian raids were still common. This was an Indian hunting ground, and settlers were encroaching on territory that was really not theirs. John and Thomas had to be very careful with their livestock, and on at least one occasion had to track down stolen horses. There is a great story from this era concerning John and his breeches. As was the custom of the time, men had one pair of pants. And when he came here, and throughout the winter, he survived with one pair of pants. His pants were getting pretty thin, and there weren't many people around anywhere, except at the Casey station. William Casey's wife came under guard to the cabin during the winter to patch John Field's pants because the seat and the knees had just about worn through. And since it was a small cabin, he had to retire to bed while she worked on his pants. And that was a story that's been handed down for generations in more than one family in this county. Well, suffice it to say, William Hurt came in the spring with his wife, his other children, and created the first settlement outside of fort or station in this region, and fought the elements, planted crops, raised a large family, and John Field, from the beginning, learned the importance of good business. Whether he practiced it or not is another thing. Now, when the city of Columbia was founded at the creation of Adair County, William Hurt was one of the important movers and shakers in town and county government. He owned property in the town of Columbia, and John Field was very active as a young man, born 1777. By 1802, he was beginning to create his own name, and not just that with his stepfather. He was married in 1801, while this was still Greene County, to Marticia Stapp, the daughter of Joshua Stapp Jr., the last of a long group of children in the Stapp family, many of whose descendants cover this entire county and region. John was, among other things, the first jailer of Adair County. He was the first postmaster of Columbia Courthouse, as it was called originally. He was a town trustee for many years, and his signature is found on many documents here. In time, he built the nice brick federal-style house that we just saw earlier. And he and Marticia reared their children there. We have a good list of children, plus a couple of possibles who died quite young. We have no Bible record or any other family chronology of the Fields for whatever reason. I'll tell you a little about that later, perhaps. But Dr. Samuel he studied medicine, as was the custom, with a local doctor. His brother, Elijah Creel Field, did the same thing. They partnered for many years. They were both partners with Dr. Nathan Gaither and the Winstons and others. So they left a long line of medical history as well as personal and business history. Another son, William B. Field, my ancestor, lived in Columbia until he was grown, married, and moved out to the Glens Fork neighborhood. He married one of the Powell girls, a daughter of John Powell out there, and he farmed in that neighborhood, but also was a census taker, the county tax assessor at one point in time, and numerous other things, including deputy sheriff. They were all very active civically. Another brother, John F. Field, farmed, and that's about all, because I think he wanted to get out of the limelight. He was, though he lived in this area most of his life and eventually in Russell County, he chose not to take part in politics and so forth, as did his brothers and his father. Well, old John had plenty of money. He built that house. He traveled widely on business to buy for his store, which was on the square, in which he was eventually partners with the Creel brothers. He was not unknown to travel to New Orleans, Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C., and did so fairly regularly as far as records show. He lent money regularly. We did not have a bank here, except for a brief period beginning in 1818. He lent money and also would sign as co-signer on notes for his friends, and that's what got him in trouble, because in 1819 a financial panic struck the United States and people across the nation were devastated financially. He was no exception. He lost big money because people defaulted on their notes and he had to make good on them. For a while, he and his wife, their children already married and gone, rented rooms on the second floor of the Field house. One notably, a young lawyer had come here from Virginia, John Marshall Clemens. He rented a room upstairs and practiced law in part from the house. And Mrs. Field, it is said, was gracious enough to let him take a client up the front stairs from time to time to sit in his room and talk business instead of the usual backstairs ascension. Of course, you may know John Marshall Clemens as the husband of Jane Lampton. When they married in Columbia, they lived in that house for nearly a year upstairs before moving on to Tennessee and ultimately Missouri. And of course, John Marshall Clemens and Jane Lampton were the parents of Samuel Langhorne Clemens, Mark Twain, as we know. She visited here often after that. We don't think Mark Twain was ever here, but that's okay. We claim him as a grandson of Adair County just the same. Now, John Field lost that house as a result of bankrupt cases. And he retired in the latter part of the 1820s to Glens Fork, to a small farm that he was able to hold on to. There he lived out the rest of his days farming, and is buried in a small cemetery known as the Powell Cemetery, for his son William B. had married Sarah Powell, and they were laid to rest in the Powell family cemetery. There's so much to John Field, and we could go on for hours. But let's cut it short right there. Thank you.